it's intriguing to see that these are the issues of 40 years ago, and to then try to evaluate what progress has been made from the issues that existed in 1972 in those years, in the early 70s, to where we are now in 2012. I'll now hand over to the panel. I introduced to you first Rod Little and then Brian Butler, who will make some comments and ask some questions, and we'll give Pat then a chance to conclude this part of our discussion, which is what was the Aboriginal Tent Embassy about, what were the issues. So I'll hand over first to Rod Little. Thank you.
Thanks, Les. I guess to kick off, just to make some comments about the film and Pat's presentation. Thank you very much, Pat, for that. There's a reflection on the embassy and the activities that back then was about, what really struck me was the unity of people and the common drive that they held with each other about land rights, about sovereignty and other things. But there was that passion and that commitment, I thought, and what I got from Pat's comments as well as the film, they were so strong. And I feel there's an absence of some of that today, but it just sort of regenerated some of that for me watching the film and listening to Pat's comments. And I think the other thing that struck me there was that there was broader support from the broader community, although I think there was one person who was persistent in aggravating Gary Foley there a few times about but I think that there was a lack of understanding and perception of how people should behave and think from one way, and that was that person. The other comments I'd like to make is about which struck me as very difficult for people, like Pat mentioned, that the responsibility taken upon a few and the concerns that they held for people who might get harmed in such a protest. Now, I know that we don't have these things today in the modern era of protests, but I could really feel for people who were in that situation, who had a leadership role, I guess, Pat and others, that the concerns for others' safety was also something else that they had to deal with. So I sympathise with that. The other comment, and hopefully we'll get comments from yourselves, is the importance of national identity and the unity of the group, or that group there, but their followers and the people that they believed in something similar. We've all heard of the comments about power of the people, and I think that it's just so true in that film. It's there, it's people that we know, people that we've heard about, it's part of our legends and our history. That identity nationally but also internationally is starting to surface. But I guess the other thing that worries me is about the unified approach. Whilst we respect that people all have different views and different thoughts about things based on their experience and their learnings and their qualifications, I guess we need to, come to some middle ground about what it is we want to achieve for ourselves as a peoples. And I'd just like to leave it there and leave some of those thoughts with you. But there are my thoughts from listening to Pat, and thank you for that, Pat, and also viewing the film, which was very, very strong for me. So I'll hand over to Ryan for his comments.
Thanks very much. I just want to acknowledge Ngunnawal people, first of all. To me, that was very emotional, watching that film about the early days of the Tent Embassy. I certainly was fortunate enough to be able to travel to Canberra on many occasions when we had events happening there and at the Tent Embassy. One of the things that I remember very vividly is protecting Charlie Perkins from getting hit over the head with a brick in one of our events that took place there. But to me, I feel really sad that from the establishment of the Tent Embassy, people all around Australia took lead from that and got strength from that to be able to develop their communities and to be able to form strong groups to be able to negotiate with government to get and build medical services, health programs and education programs and housing programs. And they were working really well. The communities were working well. But for some strange reason, the flame went out in our right across this whole country, all at the same time, it seemed. And a lot of those communities now, we've lost a lot of the programs. We've lost a lot of the communities struggling. Some communities are almost like ghost towns now, because they're not they're not maintaining any sort of strength and ability to be able to hold the communities, the people in those communities. So people are leaving the communities, and so it's real sad to think that all of that energy that was put into the Tent Embassy in those days was ignored by a lot of people. And I'm talking about some of our own people too, because once they got established, they didn't seem the need to have to even recognise the Tent Embassy. But some of us did. Some of us kept on going. And it's those people that kept on going that have now got us to where we are today. And hopefully and that is a clear understanding of what we need to do. And I think that what we must do is to try and work together, getting those authorities of government at all levels and people that have got the ability to be able to influence either in education, housing and in industry, to be able to understand really what we want them to do. And what we want them to do is to not continue to harass our young people from reaching their full potential within the workforce, within the education system, because that is what's going to determine whether or not we're leaving behind, this generation is leaving behind something for our future, for our children's future. And I'm talking about lateral violence throughout this country. I won't read this paper now, but I'll get the opportunity to do so later and talk to it later on. But lateral violence since colonisation in this country is the major thing that's created disruption to Aboriginal community. It's not only just corroded the fabric of Aboriginal community, it's corroded the fabric of throughout this whole nation, throughout non-Aboriginal people in this country. And so we've got to start acting and working smarter than what we've been in the last 30 or 40 years. And I think that we can do it. And hopefully that from my constituents' point of view in Chamber 3 within the Congress, that I will be able to, with the aid of the rest of the Congress team, to be able to demonstrate to the rest of Australia, particularly our Aboriginal and Islander people, that we can make it. We can, with this at this time, make something worthwhile for our kids and our families. And I think that we have the wherewithal to do that, but I think that we must make sure that we don't fall foul of lateral violence anymore. It's with us as I speak. It's very much at work today because a lot of our children are being harassed within the workplace, with those kids that are doing traineeships in government departments and even in our own organisations. Traineeships that they're embarking on are being hampered because they're being the victim of lateral violence by our own people, and that's going to be my baby for the next until the day I die. So, pass over to Pat now.
Thank you. Just a couple of omissions from when I was speaking earlier. You saw in that film there a lot, at the latter part of the film there, a lot of scenes of Dennis Walker speaking, and Dennis Walker was very critical, especially in the early months of the Aboriginal Embassy. But the person, I suppose, who stayed most consistently at the embassy during that whole period from January through to the end of July in 1972 was, of course, Michael Anderson. And Michael Anderson and Bobby McLeod, and as I said earlier, Ambrose Golden Brown, and I think it was Alan Shipley or Shipway, not quite sure what his surname was. Those four were the glue that held the embassy together. Okay, believe it or not, just the other day, it was Michael Anderson you saw carrying Carol Thompson, who was doing that laid-back, I'm not going to try and demonstrate it, but she was carried and he was the one at the front, young, very young, almost unrecognisable Michael Anderson. And just last week when I was in Broadway Shopping Centre in the heart of Sydney, who did I bump into as I came out of a lift in Dimmock's bookshop was Carol Thompson. So I did remind her, of course, that it was the 40th anniversary and we would expect her to be up here. At the time, I do remember that we weren't really sure about this American influence coming in to the Aboriginal community because many of us who had been brought up on the East Coast had been so isolated from our culture in lots and lots of ways that we were very unfamiliar with traditional methods of dance, and we were just discovering, how brilliantly that was happening throughout the many parts of Australia where missions had tried to stomp on Aboriginal culture and extinguish it. And we were just discovering it really, and then along came Carol with that very black American influence, and we weren't really sure how to take it. But in the long run, the reality is that culture, like everything else, goes through a process of change over time.